Send the cops.
Welcome back to SlashBack Cinema, the podcast that digs up the best of 70s and 80s horror. I'm Shawnee.
And I'm Ryan. Today we're talking about one of the most punk rock, brain-munching, and campy zombie movies of all time. This is 1985's Return of the Living Dead, directed by Dan O'Bannon, the guy that helped bring us Alien, and somehow he decided this time around zombies needed to be faster, funnier, and way more obsessed with brains.
Does Return of the Living Dead still party like it's 1985, or has rigor mortis set in? That's what we're here to find out.
Send more podcasters.
Nice. That is one of the classic lines in this movie. Do you remember this movie from the 80s?
Similar to many of these, I was aware of it, but I'd never seen it, so this was my first time.
Not until we saw it this time did I really look into and sort out the difference between the Night of the Living Dead films versus this films.
It's always been confusing because there was Night of the Living Dead, then there was Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, there was this version.
And the titles kind of give it away because the Romero ones, they're all like related to a time of day. That's
right.
Night of the Living Dead, and then Day of the Dead, and Dawn of the Dead. And he just likes those Sunrise of the Dead, Early Morning of the Dead. And then Return of the Dead. Return of the Living Dead, they just did Return of the Living Dead 1, 2, 3. I found that helpful because the Romero ones with the time of day in them are meant to be satire or cultural commentary. They're much more grim.
Yeah.
And then the Return of the Living Dead, as we'll talk about today, the whole tone of them is like wacky.
And so they made some really interesting decisions. I'm sure you read about this in terms of differentiating what they were doing from what Romero did in terms of how their zombies would show up versus his, they were kind of ghouls with white makeup and dark eyes.
Right.
These were developed in a way to be very distinct, and we'll probably talk about some of the differences here in a little bit.
I was excited when I saw the description of this movie. The first 2 or 3 words I saw was horror comedy, and I thought, great, horror comedy. That's the genre that you and I have most enjoyed talking about on this podcast.
Our true passion, yes.
Right. I thought this movie had like a little bit of Rocky Horror tone in that if you've seen it a bunch of times, you can look for these little moments that are clearly fan favorites. When you go online, there's like certain zombies that people really love or have affection for. There's very specific lines that people get excited about. And yeah, it's super campy and silly. All right, hit me with a quick summary.
So it follows this group of punks. Again, more punks in the films. We were talking about some punks and demons. But yeah, it's this group of teenagers, and they're out having fun in the graveyard. And then you've got these warehouse employees that are the ones that accidentally released that gas. So it kind of cuts between the two of them, and there's overlap with the one kid working in the warehouse is friends with the punks. But it is primarily set in those 2 locations, and it's them basically battling these zombies who have come back from the dead and all the ensuing antics.
I noticed this movie was released August 16th, 1985. And that date stood out to me because August 16th, of course, is associated with a lot of terrible things that have happened in the world. It is the day that Elvis Presley died, the day that Aretha Franklin died. So, August 16th is a traumatic day for a lot of people. I felt like the people that made this movie did not have a deep knowledge of punk culture because 2 of the punks are actually preppies and not really punks.
They were like a little bit more new wave. Yeah, yes. Not full on. So, it's the intersection of those cultures. You had new wave and punk, but yes.
But do you think they were driving around together?
They looked like they escaped from the Breakfast Club or something. And then, suicide, driving around his beat up car.
Right.
It seemed like he was from a different crew, perhaps, but that car was pretty cool.
What time does Freddie get off?
10 o'clock.
I ain't sitting here 2 fucking hours. Oh, we could always go drive around. I don't got gas. You want to buy some gas, idiot? I was kidding. We could go fool around in there for a while.
You mean that cemetery? Oh, let's do that.
I think this movie did originally have some local punk music in it. But did you read about this? It got kind of complicated. The movie was like re-released and they didn't have the rights to all the original songs, so they had to change some of them around.
Yeah, but even with the subs that were in place, they still had some pretty heavy hitters there, the 45 Graves and the Cramps, and there was like a Billy Idol cover by another punk band. The soundtrack's actually really good. It's fun.
That's good to hear because maybe you're more prepared for the quiz today than I thought you might be. So
okay.
We'll come back.
All right.
Let's talk about hot takes. What'd you love? What'd you hate? What were some of your favorite moments?
One thing I loved, and it's kind of more towards the beginning of the movie when they're first setting things up in the warehouse. So it's Freddy's the younger kid who's taken on this job with Frank, who I don't know if he's his uncle or whatever, but he's the guy that's showing him the ropes around the warehouse. And once they accidentally crack that bottle of toxin in the basement and it releases the gas, they get exposed, but also the embalmed corpse gets exposed.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do. And then they call in their boss, Bert. And then it just reminded me of like a Three Stooges skit, the way there was like so much physical comedy. And it was hilarious when they are letting the cadaver out of the locked room to kill him, because everybody knows you get a zombie in the brains and they die. But quickly you learn that in this movie that the rules of the zombies don't apply. You can't kill these zombies. And that whole sequence, it was high comedy. They hit the corpse in the head with the pickaxe, and then they're sawed off the head. Then the body's running around the room, knocking everything over. I don't know.
Got him. Son of a bitch. Christ, it ain't dying. I thought you said if we destroyed the brain, it'd die. It worked in the movie. Well, it ain't working now, Frank. You mean the movie lied?
The people in this movie seem to have seen other zombie movies. Night of the Living Dead is referenced in this movie as a movie they're familiar with. So yeah, they think like, oh, you hit it in the head and kill it, and that doesn't work. And then they think, oh, you chop the head off and kill it, and that doesn't work. And then they just chop it up into little pieces.
It's just silly.
It is super slapsticky. I did not really remember how absurd it is. And it really, if you remember mid-'80s comedies, movies, like were I think these actors were told to bring a kind of like Police Academy energy, or Caddyshack, or what was the movie where they a car race across country that Burt Reynolds was in?
Cannonball Run.
So yeah, this movie to me had like Cannonball Run energy. Like these actors were absurdly over the top, and when they were frightened, they were like whimpering and crying. Two guys like get exposed to the chemical early on, and they spend like 65 minutes of the movie just like moaning and rolling around and talking about how much pain they're in. It actually started to annoy me.
I know.
How much they want.
Frank was just like, oh, and then Freddy's like, it hurts.
Yes, I couldn't believe how long it took them to turn into zombies.
First, I got a really fucked headache. Then my stomach started cramping up. Now my arms and legs are cramping.
Let's take a look.
I feel like the tone of this movie, it's not like half comedy, half horror. It's like 65% comedy and 35% horror. Did you get that sense too?
I think those numbers are right. Yeah, there's definitely gore in this film. This is not like some of the films we've watched where it's just like over the top in every scene. It's a piece of it, but yeah, they definitely lean into the comedy piece for this one.
Part of what I guess I did like about it, just because we've now lived through 35 years of zombie movies, is these zombies are kind of surprising. These are the first zombies I've ever seen that are so adept at using technology. They don't have any problem opening doors, working CB radios.
Right.
Because the zombies were eating them. The police come, the zombies eat them, and then the zombie gets on the radio and like asks for more. It was like zombie DoorDash. They were just making calls for more people to come so they could snack on them.
Which was absolutely hilarious. Yeah, send more police, send more paramedics.
So that was pretty weird. It was odd to me to see zombies chit-chatting.
There were also really fast-moving zombies, which I was expecting the lumbering. Right. So this might have been the first fast-moving zombies movie.
The thing about them being fast is, because this gets brought up in the movie, is a character says they have the same strength as a person. And so they're fast in that they run the same speed of a human being. They're not like World War Z racing at you fast.
Right.
They're just like a guy running at you, and they have the strength of one man. It's like they're pretty regular.
Yeah.
You would think like some of these guys in this movie are supposed to be tough punks. They've got knives. Some of them are athletes. You would think they would be a little tougher and be able to take out these zombies a little bit easier. I found it kind of fresh.
The one thing that really struck me watching this movie is there's a scene where they get a hold of one of the zombies, and it's sort of this half corpse, basically missing half of its lower body. It's this woman zombie, and they bring it up and lay it down on this gurney and tie it to the table. It's moving, it's animated, it's still alive, but they're having this conversation with it, and they're asking it all these questions. Like, it just struck me as such a strange turn, and it was like this moment of, I would say, almost depth to this film, where they're like, well, asking the zombie all these questions.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Why do you eat people?
Not people. Brains.
Brains only.
Yes.
Why?
The pain.
about the pain.
The pain of being dead.
I don't know. What was your take on that scene?
Yeah, I listed that scene as one of my favorites only because it was so different than anything I'd ever seen before. Yeah, because the zombie they tie to the bed, it's just like a torso and a head. There's like not much left of it. I've never seen a zombie chit-chat so much, but it is weird to see it.
Right. It was like they were doing some zombie research.
Since we're talking about scenes that stood out, the other scene that I noted that I thought was just surprising in that it was odd was when Frank, one of the characters you meet at the very beginning of the movie, turns into a zombie. He and we never have spoiler alerts, but I mean, the movie came out in 1985. You had your chance. Frank just commits suicide as a zombie, which I've never seen anything like that before. He just climbs into a crematorium and just lights himself up. I guess he doesn't like being a zombie. I definitely have never seen anything like that before in a zombie movie. So those were some of the scenes that just stood out to me.
I know this is an iconic scene, but perhaps we could also throw in there in unexpected moments, Trash's dance scene where
yes. Oh, so
Lena
Trash is one of the punks.
Yes, one of the punks. She's this female punk, and she has this conversation beforehand about her fantasies to be
wait, not a fantasy. The thing she's most afraid of.
Was it? She was most afraid of it, or that was what she wanted to have happen?
We'll cut to the tape. I mean, it's weird because then she immediately starts dancing naked. So it is a little bit confusing to see this, but we'll play it. My recollection is she said the thing she's most afraid of in the world is being eaten by a bunch of old men.
Do you ever wonder what would be the most horrible way to die?
Try not to think about dying too much.
Well, for me, the worst way would be for a bunch of old men to get around me and start biting and eating me alive.
And I gotta say, Ryan, as an old man, I took offense. Was she okay with younger men? I don't know why old men. I don't know why she's specifying like that.
Feeling targeted for sure. This punk has this conversation, then proceeds to jump up on this mausoleum casket thing and take off all her clothes and dances on top of the grave. And then the punks are all dancing around with flares. Let's get some light over here. Trash is taking off her clothes again.
I got the sense that the filmmakers were like, well, we have to have a woman naked in the movie. And they didn't have any way to work that in the plot. So in the most contrived possible way, a woman just becomes aroused, takes off her clothes, and dances completely naked. All right, we need to move on.
Right.
My hot take of this movie is if you saw it in the 80s or saw it when you were 13, 14, 15 years old, this movie could be really fun as a horror movie because it definitely has like blood and goo and things that some teenagers like. But then it's also not cruel, right? It's not like, it doesn't feel like torture porn like some horror movies today.
Yeah.
It's kind of like silly and campy. But I also felt like it was surprisingly boring at times. And I realized the reason I was bored was it wasn't clear what the characters were trying to accomplish, right? If you think of like a classic plot, the hero is supposed to want to do something. The punks were just like kind of hanging out and then they were just running around. So it was like, I get they just want to live, but they didn't really have a plan or an idea of how to do that. They just ran from place to place and the zombies would chase them. And then the other characters in the movie, police and then the military, they show up and then are getting eaten and people are slowly turning into zombies. But it's like, I don't quite know what the plot of this movie is. What are we building towards? What are they trying to accomplish? And so for long swatches of it, I was like, unless you're really entertained by how ridiculous all the acting is, it's not like a very tightly written movie, even though it is 90 minutes. Like they cut it so that it's not a really long movie, but at times I still felt like it dragged.
Yeah, I was feeling that, especially once they were in the mortuary with the cathedral. There was I guess the viewing room for the bodies or whatever.
Yeah,
they spent a surprising amount of time running around to different spots in that building. Everybody has boards, nails, and hammers, and they're hammering up the nails, and the zombies break through, and then they beat them with sticks, and then they board it back up again. Yeah, that sort of started dragging, and then that was also overlaid with, you were talking about those kind of drawn out transformation deaths of Freddie and Frank, and yeah, it did drag at times. Like it felt like a little directionless.
One thing we've talked about in the past is with both comedy and horror, you start out at a level and then you have to keep like topping yourself. If it's a horror movie, you got to keep ratcheting up the scares And if you're a comedy, you got to keep getting wackier and wackier. This movie, I felt like the writer director, it doesn't really build. Like there aren't really scary scenes that get scarier as they go, and there aren't really funny scenes that get funnier as they go. So yeah, I think I maybe enjoyed it. We'll see, but maybe a little less than you, because I found that I don't think it holds up great after all these years with so many other great horror movies that you can compare it to. Horror comedies like Shaun of the Dead, that I think are up there as some like the greatest zombie movies of all time. I don't know that this does that. Although, you want to talk about some like filmmaking lore?
Yeah, what you got?
Did you read that this was the first movie that emphasized the idea that zombies eat brains
versus just eating people? Right, the brains were what help to stave off the pain of being undead.
Right, and so these zombies are like the first time that you hear zombies going brains, brains. And after that, that becomes like part of the lore of the monster. And so it's from this movie. I didn't realize it had like such an influence on the zombie mythology.
Yep. Note I had in terms of film lore, in the beginning, Frank, when they've released the toxin, I guess it smells horrible, and they're trying to get rid of that smell. He busts out a can of Lysol to hose down the room to freshen things up. And it sounds like they actually like worked with Lysol for product placement.
Yes,
and the quote was, they like the idea that Lysol would kill any conceivable odor. I
saw that too.
Wacky.
Yeah, we don't see a lot of product placement in these low budget movies, but Lysol found, they got some money from the Lysol folks.
Totally.
I feel like we have to talk a little bit about the zombie that's called Tarman, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is a zombie, and you see him in the trailer. It hardly even looks like what we think of as a modern zombie. It looks like a guy covered in tar, and he's got like but kind of a skeleton face, a weird little like plastic tongue that sticks out. And then he also just chit chats. He also can talk to people, even though he doesn't seem to have lips. He just has like teeth. And he seems to be like a popular favorite zombie from this movie that people remember. Maybe because he actually has like a name. They call him Tarman in the movie.
And yeah, distinct look, and definitely EC Comics influence. The writer or director, they all alluded to that being an influence. But yeah, total EC comic vibes with that character.
That's right.
And that is one of the things that brings personality to this film is the talking aspect of these zombies.
Oh, speaking of which, I did have another little piece of lore. The director paid some of the extras additional stipend. You know this one? By convincing them to eat, I guess, a sheep's brain. Was it raw? I think it was. And the director went ahead and ate some of it too to show them that he wouldn't ask an actor to do anything he wouldn't do. So they actually are scenes in this movie where an animal brain gets eaten, which I didn't know before watching the movie. It might have made the movie feel more gross to me had I known. This is not Jello. This is a brain.
Yeah. It seems unnecessary to have them have eaten. It seems a bit sadistic, but I guess if he's participating, and they get a little bump in their paycheck, who are we to judge, Shawnee? Like,
that's right. Yeah. I mean, it's like a little fear factor built into the movie that you, behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think it's not encouraged to eat raw brains. I'm not a scientist, although RFK might say differently. It might be good for you. It's like raw milk, raw brains.
Yeah.
Well, he did have like a brain worm thing, right? Probably from eating raw brains. Yeah.
Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you figured it out.
Yeah. What I really liked about this movie is, and a lot of bands did this too. There with punk rock, there was always this intersection of culture. It was like the art, the music, and oftentimes social commentary. This movie, I thought, brought some great ingredients together. You had horror, you had comedy, you had punk rock, and it also had a really iconic poster. Carl Ramsey. He also did the Beetlejuice artwork and Poltergeist. But I thought he did such a great job on this poster. You see it and you instantly get what the movie's about. It's pretty iconic. Anyway, shout out to Carl.
All right, you ready to give the ranking?
Let's do it. What do you got?
All right, so based on what we said already, and I have to say, I was excited that it was a horror comedy, but then I didn't think the funniness was funny enough, and I didn't think that the horror was horrible enough. I feel like you do have to give this movie props for its influence, its cultural influence. But if you're rating it from like a contemporary person who's like looking for a movie to watch, I feel like if you're an adult and you know zombies, not sure this movie's going to do it for you. So I'm giving this movie surprisingly just 2 stabbies.
Wow.
Yes, I know.
Wow.
And I knew that would shock you, but it is not a movie that I would like recommend to people or watch again. I feel like it's like historically interesting, but I did not find it super funny or entertaining. So, how about you? I feel like you enjoyed it more than me.
I think I did. I think it had a nice mix and amalgam of punk rock and zombies and humor and horror. I agree with you that some of it felt a little directionless at times, especially later in the film. But I would say the first half, it was a lot of fun. It dragged as it went on, and then it culminates in this kind of just over the top, spoiler alert, a nuclear bombing of the town, which seems to only release more zombie gas. So, thus the sequels. So overall, a really fun romp. I love that it was linked back to the original Night of the Living Dead. You got punk rock, you got high comedy, you got horror. What's not to like? It's a great mix. I'm going to give this one 4 stabs.
Yeah, like I said, I think I could see why this movie would be beloved, especially if you saw it when you were 13, 14, 15, because I feel like that's the age group that this movie is like pitched perfect to in terms of how silly it is and how like wacky the deaths are. But the problem is we've had like 40 years of great zombie movies.
I know.
And so it's hard to compare to that stuff.
Right. You think about Shaun of the Dead, like you mentioned, or even Anna and the Apocalypse, which genuinely had some hilarious stuff.
Yeah, we've seen better zombie movies on the podcast. The one last thing I'll say about it is I was surprised at how kind of dark the overall tone was, and not in terms of like the comedy, but the zombies basically can't die, right? They stab it in the head, that doesn't work. They cut the head off, the head is trying to bite you, and the body's running around. They cut the arms off, the arms are grabbing you and pulling at you. So when they put it into a crematorium and burn it, the chemicals that come out of the crematorium just spread to more zombies. And then at the end of the movie, the government drops a nuclear bomb on the town. That also, the last scene you see is a graveyard where more zombies pop out because of the nuclear radiation and the spread. So the movie, like overall, I was surprised. There is no solution to the zombies in this movie. They always win. And that actually did kind of remind me of Night of the Living Dead. Romero has like, at least in that
there's
first
no
movie,
way out. Yep.
Right. It was like there's no solution to this, and it's like it's a dark, ugly world that Romero created. And I feel like this movie is tonally completely different, but it still has kind of a dark view of government, a dark view of human nature. The monster is unable to be defeated no matter what you do. Even if you know what the rules are of zombies, you're not going to stop it. And so I was surprised that the ending doesn't end on a joke. It sort of ends with the zombies win.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
How can it talk? It's not a real voice. This box just interprets signals from the computer and turns them into sound.
Shall we play a game?
So, inspired by the punk aesthetic of this movie, my questions today are all about punk bands.
All right. Now, if I fail this, I'm going to have to hang my hat up and walk away from this podcast.
I feel confident you should do pretty good with this one.
All right.
Ready? Question number 1. So this band is sometimes considered one of the first true punk bands. They released their first album in '76, and the 4 members all took the same last name, even though they're not related to each other. What was the name of that band? Was it the Sex Pistols, the Ramones, the Buzzcocks, or the Clash?
For the listeners out there, if you get this one wrong, shame on you. I'm going to judge you. It is the Ramones.
Yes, Joey, Johnny, Dee Dee, and Tommy Ramone. Yes. I know so little about this that when I saw their names, I'm like, wait, they're all brothers? In fact, no. That's how little I know about punk culture. But I knew you would know the answer. Yeah, they just took those. And then when other people joined the band, they just had to take the name Ramone.
Right.
All right, here's another one. A slow ball right over the plate, Ryan. So by the 1990s, punk was back on everyone's musical radar thanks to pop punk. So I'm going to list 4 bands. Which one of these 4 is not a pop punk act from the 90s? You ready?
Wow. And I just have to qualify pop punk, but judged by the true punks, that was not real punk.
Yeah, while researching this, I read a quote that someone said that punk only lasted 100 days. And immediately after that, everyone else was posers. All right, so here you go, Ryan. I'm going to read you 4 band names. Which one is not a pop punk act? Is it The Offspring, Blink-182, Green Day, or One Direction?
What? One Direction.
You're laughing because you're so good at this. You're like, these aren't even, I might as well be asking you about members of your family. All right, you ready? Here's another one for you. I should have started to make these hard.
I'm liking winning a quiz though.
It feels good, right? Yeah, I feel like this is up your alley. All right, Ryan, which two cities are mentioned as the birthplace of punk fashion and music? So I'm going to give you 4 options. Each option is 2 cities, but only one answer. These are the 2 cities that are considered the birthplace of punk fashion.
Yes.
So A, New York and Chicago. B, New York and London. C, Chicago and London. Or D, London and Philadelphia. Where did punk start, Ryan?
Correct answer would be B. New York and London.
That's nicely done.
Nice.
Okay, ready? Which album by The Clash featured on its sleeve artwork a photograph of the bassist Paul smashing his instrument during a live performance? Was it Damaged? Was it Sandinistas? Was it Give 'Em Enough Rope? Or was it London Calling?
London Calling.
That is correct. Nicely done.
At Damaged, you're trying to throw me for a loop. That's Black Flag. You're not going to get me with that one.
Well done. All right, here's another one. And I got to say, just being friends with you, just the energy that you gave off in the 90s was enough for me to learn some of these. And I listened to none of these bands. All right, Ryan. So this guy was the lead singer of a hardcore band in the 1980s. But he later earned a Grammy Award for spoken word album for his memoir, Get in the Van. Was it Henry Rollins, Joey Ramone, Johnny Rotten, or Jello Biafra?
That would be Sir Henry Rollins.
That is correct. Nicely done. You nailed punk trivia as I expected you to. Well done. I think you deserve a big pat on the back for your success.
Well, if I got the punk questions wrong, I start losing my street cred around here in Vermont.
That wraps up another trip down memory lane. Hopefully you enjoyed revisiting Return of the Living Dead as much as we did.
Don't forget to follow us on our socials. We're on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe however you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you do love the show, leave us a review. It helps other people find out about us.
And we want to hear from you. If you have a favorite memory from the 70s or 80s, a classic horror movie you want us to dissect, just drop us a line on SlashBackCinema.com. Your suggestions keep the conversation alive.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Run that music.
No. Yeah.